Like the third leg of the tripod, we had Cats on yesterday.
Oh, yes.
Today we had Ben Portnoy.
Yes.
And now we've got you, Stefan Krajisnik.
Krajisnik.
Krajisnik. God, last time it took me about 3 times.
Time. No, I'm just kidding.
He's not even going to attempt it. But, of course, you cover Mississippi State, Clarion Ledger. That's why you're down here, firing off multiple questions on Mike Leach. That was impressive in itself. But is this your first media days?
No, actually, my first assignment, so I graduated from Indiana May 2021. So my first assignment when I was working with the Daily Journal was SEC Media Days. So last year I went to Media Days at Birmingham, and now I'm here with the Clarion Ledger for round 2. And it's a blast. It's a blast, man.
Yeah, no doubt. So what did you learn anything from the multiple questions you got to fire off from old Leach? I mean, we got Netflix recommendations.
Yeah.
We got what else we get down there?
The small package, that one's going viral right now.
That will quickly go viral. Like if you take it out of context. What's funny is like we get Leach like that all the time. Where if he's in a good mood, I mean, he'll talk about anything, anything possible. And if you ask him like a serious football question, a lot of the time you don't really get a great answer. Like he kind of like over time. I mean, I followed him. We had him like the local media scrum, then we had him on the main stage, and I followed him to the electronic media room. And I mean, he got asked the same question about Will Rogers like 3 or 4 times. It kind of gets boring over time, but like he likes the random questions. The small package, big package thing was like an actual, like he was going in depth about football and like breaking it down. And of course, he said something that's going to be taken out of context and go viral. It's be like, well, that was our one chance.
Well, I like it because Lane came out here yesterday explaining why do we wear ties. You know, so and now we got the Leach.
And Leach hates ties. Last year, his whole thing was he hates coming to events like these where he has to wear a tie and he hates making opening statements. He doesn't
that's
like
what I'm
any of
saying.
that
Yeah, is his opening statements going away? I mean, if he keeps
He'd never. I mean, he'll sit down and it's funny because like as a journalist, you kind of like the opening statements because it's almost like an icebreaker. Like a coach is like, you kind of tell like, are they like really like pissed off after the game that they lost, or are they kind of like in a good mood? So you sit down, you get that icebreaker. He sits down, he's like, all right, questions, and then you just go from there. And it's like, all right, you better have a question ready to go. Because there's one time where he did that, and there was like a slight delay as who's going to raise their hand first, get the microphone first, or something like that. And he was like, no questions? And we were like, no, we got questions. Sit down, we got questions.
So I asked Katz the same thing because he covers Lane Kiffin down there. When you come to an event like this, so many media personalities, how many people come up to you and say, you lucky bastard, you get to cover Mike Leach?
I don't know how many people call me lucky, but a lot of people come up to me and ask, like, what's he like outside of, the viral rants and things like that? Like, what's he like when his Monday availability is done and he's, walking to the door and trying to leave? Like, what? And he's really, like, people have said this about him all the time. And Sankey talked about all the degrees he had and going to law school in Pepperdine. Like, he's really smart guy. Like, you can talk to him about anything. I mean, I interviewed him one time. I did a story on when he went to law school in Pepperdine and kind of talked to some of his former professors and things like that. It was just like an interesting tidbit you kind of mix in as you talk, football all season. And they all talked about how smart he was. And I called him and we talked. And this interview, you expect it to be like, 15, 20 minutes. And we talked on the phone for 3 hours about anything and everything. I mean, I probably used 15 minutes of it for a story. And I probably have another 2 hours that I can't share with anyone. There's just a lot in there where he's a really smart guy and he loves to travel the world and things of that nature. Like, there's a lot to talk about with him.
Yeah.
I've heard the same thing. People cover him. I guess one of my buddies, I don't want to reveal too much, but he worked for an outlet. Leach was totally against the outlet, basically said, I'm not going to answer a question from you all season, but they became really good buddies because he had no problem with the reporter. So, he's an interesting guy to kind of figure out, but it seems like when he's got his mind set on something, he's not going to change it.
Yeah, it happens, and it happened on the state beat last season. It's interesting. There's a lot of times where you could tell he kind of likes to have his program be his program, not have us asking questions and reaching there too much. But he also does it to. And there's a lot of reporters that probably wouldn't say this, but I think he does have a great deal of respect of what we do. I talked about all the schools you went to. He's written a ton of essays and read a ton of books where he'll. If you write something that's wrong, he's not afraid to be like, you could have wrote that better, like that kind of stuff. So he's a smart guy, and know that if even if it's just a typo or like a poor grammar or something, he'll let you know.
So this should be a really exciting season though for the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
Return, I believe they lead the SEC in returning production. It seemed like Leach was kind of trying to downplay all the returning experience they have. Of course, Will Rogers.
Right.
This is year 3. It seems like wherever Leach goes, obviously he has success, but it really takes off year 3, year 4.
Right.
Could you see that for the Bulldogs with what they've got coming back? They could be a dark horse. I don't want to say win the West, but maybe surprise a couple teams and finish a lot higher than most anticipate.
Yeah, what's tough for them, the difficulty that you get is instead of playing Vandy this year, you're playing Georgia. So that's not a really favorable draw. Instead of playing home against Kentucky, you're at Kentucky, things of that nature. So it's a tough schedule, and by some metrics, it's the toughest in the nation. I mean, it's top 3 toughest schedule, whichever metric you end up reading. But there's so much returning production, and Leach kind of downplays it in the sense of it's still not like the veteran team that he envisions. Mm-hmm. But he's got guys. I mean, Will Rogers is in his 3rd year with more starts under his belt than most quarterbacks. I mean, you remember in 2020, he came in as a freshman and was starting at Georgia when State had 43 scholarship players available because COVID was still going on. I mean, there's experience on this team, but there's not a lot of, I guess, you don't have a ton of veterans, right? You have veterans in terms of experience, not in terms of age. And then you got guys like Austin Williams who are here, who've been here like, he's in his 6th year or something like that. And you got a few of those guys, but that's where it gets really hard with teams, right? Like you get to that 3rd year where the trajectory is going up and up and up, and now it's like, is it going to continue up or is it going to level out? And that's where Mississippi State has had problems with their program in the past. Now can you consistently be a team that's winning 7 or 8 games, and let's say every 5 years you win 9 or 10, right? You pull off you get to this point where it could be this year, it could be next year, where you get to this point where you got that veteran team that can pull off that 9 or 10 win season. And then you would hope in those 2-3 years in between where you're building, you get 7 or 8 wins consistently. That's where they're trying to get to right now. They get 7 wins last year. It hurts them that first season. He goes 4-7, and I mean, that 2020 COVID year was so weird. I mean, you had so many, Michigan, Penn State. I was covering Indiana. I mean, those teams were, they were losing Indiana, right? Like, you had a lot of programs that were going through, weird stretches, players opting out in 2020, certain players not available for games. And he was 4-7 in that year. And now you look at it and you're like, well, he's under 500 in his career at Mississippi State. So that number skews, I think, that perception a little bit. But the trajectory is it's on its way up. And now it's a matter of maintaining it, right? You can't afford to drop and have a 2-win year in the middle of that, because that's when you lose all the momentum that you built. And of course, winning the Egg Bowl is going to be really important this year. You can't, go 0-3 and to start off your tenure in the Egg Bowl is you'll make some fans mad.
Especially when you replace a guy that never lost the Egg Bowl.
Right.
I know he was just briefly there, but hell, he won that game every year.
We were talking to Jonathan Mingo yesterday. He was one of the players available for Ole Miss, and I was like, I asked Lane the question. I asked him, I was like, what would it mean for you to leave Ole Miss with 3 Egg Bowl wins under your belt? He's like, well, I probably should have 4 if you remember what Elijah Moore did. And I was like, I don't think anyone will ever forget that anytime soon.
I want to ask about Will Rogers, because this year feels like a quarterback year. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we got Spencer coming in. We got a lot of noise coming out of Alabama, winning another Heisman. But I think Will is not getting the respect he deserves coming into the season. Now, he's going to end the year probably with 10,000 passing yards, Right. I mean, at the end you've talked to him. I'm sure you've sat down with him. What's his mindset coming into this season?
He talked. What's interesting is, and I agree with you guys, I think he's definitely one of the more under-the-radar quarterbacks, which is surprising to say with the numbers he put up that he is under the radar. He really developed as the season went on. Like, he went from a guy that was throwing a bunch of passes and getting a bunch of completion yards to a guy who was making checks at the line. I mean, that win they had against Kentucky at home last year, they had like 30 runs, and a lot of them were Will making reads at the line. And Austin Williams was just saying that's the biggest development he's seen with Will. Is it's not just Leach in his ear telling him, hey, do this play. It's Leach telling him in his ear, and then Will actually reading the defense and saying, no, let's do this, let's do that instead. So he's developed with that experience, and like you said, I think he can have a really good year. The numbers will be there, right? Like, you play in this system, you're going to get the numbers. He'll end up being top 10 in passing yards, top 10 in completions, probably top 10 in completion percentage. All that would happen. But, I mean, Leach just earlier in our local scrum called him a Heisman candidate. Like, he thinks that he's up there. Now, if you win 7 games and you're not getting, the national coverage that, Bryce Young is getting, it's really hard to build a Heisman campaign. And there's a lot of reporters in this room who vote on the Heisman, and they'll probably admit to you that the popularity plays into some point. You have to see a guy to know that he's a Heisman candidate, right? So that's where Rodgers is in that competition. Then Leach being Leach says that Rodgers hasn't won the starting job yet, though. He says that he's the Heisman, he's a Heisman, Heisman favorite, but he hasn't won the starting job yet. So that's about all you need to know about Leach there.
Well, hey, it's funny you say that, because I was going to ask you about the backup. I keep hearing buzz about him. He was a touted recruit. What's his name? Robertson?
Sawyer Robertson, yeah.
Is it a case where it's not that they lack confidence in Will Rogers at all, but they have confidence in he's the future, and he may have to see the field at some point to showcase his talent this fall.
Yeah, so he's an air raid guy. He's from Texas. He grew up loving Texas Tech, watching Mike Leach. Like, he wanted to be a quarterback for Mike Leach, and he's got all the talent in the world. I mean, the arm talent is there. He's got the speed to get out of the pocket and make plays happen. Like, he's got the potential. And he was pretty impressive in the spring. I mean, he had his moments. He threw a couple interceptions, some of the scrimmages that we went to, and things of that nature. But he's really shown the development that State wants. And I asked Leach about that today. I was like, so is this an actual quarterback competition, or is this about building depth? And he says that Sawyer has a chance to get the starting job, which if Rogers comes out and struggles early in the games, there's going to probably be some fans who are calling for Sawyer to get the job. But what's important is they are building that depth. So where if Will has a good season, there were some. I saw one projection that had Will Rogers going in the first round of the NFL draft.
Yeah.
I don't know if he has the talent and athleticism to be that, but if he puts up the numbers, you're going to have some teams who are definitely interested. If he's a guy who's got first round attention and he wants to leave after next season, do you have someone in place? That's where State feels like they do have Sawyer Robertson in place now. And then a freshman that they just brought in, he was an early enrollee, Braden Locke. I think he's from Texas as well, another one of those gunslinger type guys. Well, now when Sawyer is done in 2 to 3 years, now you got another guy. So you kind of start this cycle where you're not going to have a gap, and quarterback is so important in Mike Leach's offense. You're not going to have a gap that's empty. So maybe Sawyer's not going to get the starting job this year, but you're trying to kind of build that domino effect where 10 years from now you've had 4 or 5 quarterbacks who have come through and been successful because they've had time to learn, behind a Will Rogers or a Sawyer Robertson and Braden Locke down the line.
I always heard about the relationship with him, with the Pirate, we like to call him, and Gardner Minshew. It was one of those that he had to finally give him the confidence where he can make those decisions on the. So you're seeing that now with Will Rogers?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the real turning point. The Kentucky game is one that comes to mind, but there was a point in the season where Leach was, said himself like, Will is reading better at the line. He's better with his eyes. People talk about quarterbacks' arm talent, things like that. Like, his eyes are developing. Like, he's seeing what defenses are bringing. That developed. The Kentucky game is the one to come to mind. The game at A&M that they won at A&M, that was a little bit earlier in the season, but you saw a lot of maturity from Will and the way he controlled that game. So it developed as the season went on, and Leach admitted it. And I think going into this year, that's something that you're going to see a ton is Will being comfortable, being the eyes on the field for Leach on the sideline.
Yeah.
The last thing I got for you, we all know what we're getting from an offense coached by Mike Leach. They're going to be explosive. They're going to score. Is it as simple to say that this team's going to go as far as the defense, which I love Zach Arnett. I thought his first year he knocked it out of the park. I had him as one of the best coordinators in the SEC.
Yep.
I thought they took a step back a little bit, particularly in allowing explosive plays last year. So, what's your concern that they don't get that fixed?
Yeah, and I think it was the last time I was on your guys' pod, we talked about the secondary a little bit. And, they got experienced guys back there who have struggled. So the number one thing you kind of think of is, can those guys develop in the right way? It's not, you can get old and not, be any better, right? You can still say, as someone who's struggled
too, right?
Right, and they added some from the portal. I mean, you lose Martin Emerson to second round in the Cleveland Browns. Like, you're losing a lot there at corner. You bring, Emmanuel Forbes moves to your number 1 corner now. You bring in some guys from the portal who's going to develop as the number 2 guy. But it was interesting talking to some of the defensive players. They have linebacker Nathaniel Watson and defensive tackle Jaden Crumity here for media days. And was talking to them about how do you kind of limit those explosive plays, because State did a really good job of getting pressure on the quarterback and they had one of the best run defenses in the nation, but they weren't getting sacks. Like, you look at the sacks numbers and they're not impressive at all. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what's this next step for the defense? And they both admitted, they were like, you got to bring the quarterback down. You got to finish the play. The longer it takes you to get to the quarterback, whether he's under pressure or not, if you don't bring him down, that's giving more time for those wide receivers to find space. So they took a lot of the blame for some of those explosive plays. I mean, people will say what they will about the secondary, and you can think back to when your favorite football team allowed that devastating big play, and you're automatically like, why is that safety so slow? Why is he not there? A lot of the times it's the guys up front have to blame. And I'm going to go on a tangent. I grew up a Bears fan. Okay, I grew up a Bears fan, and think back to like Jay Cutler Bears when they're like competing with the Packers. Okay, so week 17, Packers Bears, the winner takes the NFC North Division. Well, Rodgers rolls out. Julius Peppers doesn't bring him down. Rodgers rolls out. Tanks one. Chris Conte, blew the play, right? Like, he was not anywhere. Like, he didn't even know what coverage they were running. It's one of the worst secondary plays I've ever seen. But the more I am not like a high schooler anymore. Like the more I've like grown up and actually read that, I'm like, if Julius Peppers had just tackled him, none of that would have happened, right? So that's the kind of thing where State brings back Jordan Davis now. They have a defensive end coming off a torn ACL who Leach says looks better now than he ever did before. If they can actually bring the quarterback down now with the pressure that they bring, those guys in the secondary are not going to catch a lot of flack, and you do limit those explosive plays.
Yeah, Mike knows Mike
Leach is rubbing off on him, you know what?
Mike knows all too well about the Bears, don't you?
Oh, yeah, I'm a big Green Bay guy.
There you go. So you probably remember that play. Or I just rolling out I think it might have been Greg Jennings who caught it. I don't even remember who caught that touchdown. But
hey, before you get out of here, can you tell the audience how to follow you and the work you're doing here at SEC Media Day?
Yeah, Twitter is Skrajisnik3, SKRAJISNIK3. All my work up there, and then of course ClarionLedger.com, and keep up with our content. We have, Clarion Ledger is part of the USA Today network, so we have a ton of guys here. I mean, Nick Kelly covering Alabama, Nick Suss covering Ole Miss. Like we have, the network is great, and we got a lot of young reporters, honestly, who are led by a lot of good editors who are teaching us the ways, and it's got some of the best coverage. So ClarionLedger.com, and you'll have links to all our other sites on there too to read a bunch of stuff. It's a fun time, and it's fun when you got some coworkers who are working as hard and effectively as these guys.